By joining the military, you sacrifice a lot, even more than most people think. For example, right off the bat, when you go to boot camp, you're going to sacrifice most of your cell phone privileges. And depending on what branch, you might sacrifice all of them. You'll end up having your head shaved. If you're a dude, you're going to have to lose all your facial hair. You have to dress a certain way and speak a certain way. And you're going to have sacrifices to just your daily life. Now, I spent 13 years in the Marine Corps, and there are a lot of sacrifices that people just don't really talk about outside of service. And I want to dig into those. So if I missed any sacrifices, please comment down below so that we can create the most well-informed viewer of this video. And I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end of this video on whether or not you think some of these sacrifices can actually be beneficial to you, which I'll explain at the end. We're going to lead right off the bat with the obvious one that a lot of people don't want to talk about, which is both a physical, a mental, and a lifestyle change. You could die or get wounded or become a POW. So there's the KIA, WIA, POW world, right? You get killed in action, missing in action, prisoner of war, all that really not so fun stuff. And luckily, the POW side, MIA side has not been very prevalent over the last 10, 20 years, but it does happen. And the KIA side has. We all know somebody, at least those of us who served during that time. And I was in combat in Afghanistan. We all know somebody who passed away serving their country, and that is absolutely a sacrifice, the single greatest sacrifice that you could ever give your fellow man and or country. And we absolutely respect and love every single person who gave their all, and I would be remiss if I don't at least mention that, because that is a potential sacrifice. But the rest of this video will be a little bit more upbeat and more common for what you may foresee. And here we go. All right, the very first thing is those physical injuries. So this could be things like wear and tear on your body. This is, your shin splints, sprains, ankles. A lot of young ladies have hip fractures, hip issues while carrying a lot of weight because their bodies are just built differently. Stress fractures is a really common one. We get things like tinnitus, ringing in the ear if you're around heavy equipment or firearms or explosions. There's just a lot of wear and tear that can occur over time while you're serving in the military. And I mean, I myself, I've had things like my PCL, which is the cross section of your ACL, was torn, and I had to have that surgically replaced. I have a hearing aid that I am supposed to wear when I'm out of the office from an IED blast. There's a couple different things here and there. My lower back issues. I've got a C, I think it's my C6, has some nerve damage issues. Now, granted, I saw combat and had a little bit rougher experience than a lot of people have, and less of a rough experience that a lot of other people have, but there is going to be natural wear and tear on your body, which is why the VA disability claim is there to compensate you and take care of you medically after the fact, which I just released a video talking about all that, so please go dig into that as well. Another challenge might be the fact that you're going to be adapting to new cultures, new environments, right? While I was in Okinawa, Japan, which is a tropical climate. I was in San Diego, which is, a lovely climate, and I was a recruiter in Springfield, Missouri, which is all of the climates. And then I was in Hawaii, another tropical climate. I went to Bridgeport, which is cold weather, the Mountain Warfare Training Center for the Marine Corps, which is 38th parallel. It mirrors the Frozen Chosen in Korea and is very cold. And we were at high altitude in snowshoes and hiking around and all that stuff. I was in Afghanistan, which is a desert. So, all of the different kinds of crazy climates, high altitude, sea level, tropical, snow, desert, you name it. And so it is quite possible that you will float around amongst all of these different types of environments, as well as different cultures. I was in the Japanese culture, the Afghani culture. I was in, Hawaii, which is a different culture from where I grew up in Arkansas. I was in San Diego, which is a different culture. I was in Missouri, a lot of different cultures, vibes, and environments that you're going to have to learn to thrive in and get around in, which honestly I think is a blessing, because the more you travel, especially out of the country, the more grateful you are for the things you grew up with and have and understand. And I think it's great to get out there and experience different cultural diversities. You're going to have to deal with sleep deprivation, right? One of those physical challenges is you are not always going to get the sleep you need, whether it's that you're getting woken up in the middle of the night for fire watch. There's a lot of memes or jokes on TikTok where the worst sound you can hear in the military is shh, wake up, you have fire watch, which is the hey, you've got to go roam around for an hour and watch our gear. That does happen, probably depending on where you're stationed, what your MOS is, where you're in the field, whatever, you very well may have to post gear guard and watch on your stuff. And that is a reality. But more than that, there will be times you work really long hours. There'll be times you work really early, and if you got to be at the range at 3 a.m., it doesn't matter how early you get off. You're probably not going to go get up early enough or go to bed early enough to feel rested by then, because it means you got to be in bed by like 7 p.m., which is cutting it. And then, maybe the next day you don't have to be at work till 7 a.m. And so there are variables where, heck, for 4 months when we were in Afghanistan, we were nocturnal. We worked nights and slept days, and that was a weird adjustment, not to mention time zones and everything else. So there's just going to be, you're going to get used to the fact that you can kind of fall asleep anytime, anywhere, and that you can then also function with minimal sleep if you have to, which is really not healthy or ideal, but situation dependent. There are going to be times, we were on a convoy in Afghanistan where we were like 36 hours, I was like falling asleep at the wheel, splashing water in my face, slapping myself in the face, all the things to stay awake. And so you just never know. This one was never a big deal for me, but you may have to deal with like vaccinations. There are people who are like anti-vax or whatever. And I don't mean like the whole pandemic thing, but just in general, or don't like needles. And that can be a big issue for some people, but you are going to have to get all the different shots and vaccinations and disease and whatever. Like I had to get, we had to take malaria pills. I had to get anthrax. I had to get, what's it called? Smallpox, the smallpox shot, which leaves a scar. That one's probably the grossest. All the flu shots, all the tetanus and whatever, right? You have to get all that rabies. You got all that crap because they want to be able to send you somewhere and not have to worry about you going down for a random disease or something that could have been prevented. And that's just part of the game. So it is what it is. All right. So some of the mental stuff, one of the very first ones is just like moving away from home. For a lot of people joining the military is the first time you're really away from home. So this means like you've grown up in a very specific box. You have certain life experiences and traditions and whatever, and it's just going to get thrown in a bigger box with a whole bunch of other people's life expectations and traditions, and just until you all realize that all different cultures, types, locations, whatever, you guys can all work together and sing Kumbaya, which is great. And you're going to get a lot of diversity and a lot of wonderfulness and wonderful stuff out of that. But it can be a culture shock for sure. Like recruit training, boot camp is definitely a culture shock. Being away from family during the holidays, some of the holidays is certainly not easy for everybody and is a bit of a culture shock. And there's just a lot that comes with that. You're going to have to get used to, actually, it's funny. I was going to say you have to get used to being alone, right? Feeling lonely, but I don't think that's the case. In fact, it's funny, get a little personal for a second, but when I was going through my divorce last year, I was like petrified of going to bed. Like I would find myself like scrolling TikTok midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., like all hours of the night. There were probably 8 to 10 times that it was like 2, 3, 4 a.m. and I would just get out of bed, make coffee, like go to Waffle House or grab food on the way into the office, just go to the office and just be like, screw it, I'm not going to sleep. Like I'm wide awake still, whatever. And it took me a long time and actually some therapy, some counseling, right? Divorce counseling and personal, like individual counseling, to realize what was going on is I had never truly been alone. Not like that. And what I mean by that is this. I always had my family. Growing up in a house, I had a decent family, whatever. Go to boot camp, you're surrounded by hundreds of people in a squad bay. Then you go into the normal Marine Corps and you have a roommate in the barracks most of the time, or you finally get your own room, but like you're in a barracks with tons of Marines all over the place. You're always hanging out. You're always around people, beck and call, whatever. And you're on deployment. You're with people, like you are always around like your closest friends. And so what happened for me was like the Marine Corps became my family. So it made it easier being away from my actual family. But then going through the divorce, like that was kind of the like, oh crap, like I'm alone in my own house. Like that was where it really hit me, how different it was. So I thought being in the military was like joining a huge, great family culture, but you are leaving your family. So I guess it depends on your family experiences and what branch you choose and how that culture fits and everything. But for me, joining the military was an incredible, like new family. You are going to have to get used to operating in like high stress environments. So this can create some of that trauma. We actually joke about like trauma bonding. In fact, the closest platoon that I ever served with, security platoon, we were the Shocker platoon. I've actually got that tattooed on my chest, Shocker 1, from our deployment in Afghanistan. We were incredibly close. And a lot of that was, trauma bonding. They call it hazing, whatever. Like we didn't do anything too crazy, but we did get some like mass punishment, whatever. I'm not going to go into any details here. I'm not going to say anything that could bring up like either the, oh, that's not true, or the allegations, because nobody cares. And that was the closest I've ever been to any platoon ever. And I love all of those guys. So shout out 9th ESB Security Platoon, 10 TAC 1, 10 TAC 2. If you guys were there, I love all of you. Chef's kiss, whatever. That being said, there are a lot of like high stress situations. I always joked about this when I was a recruiter, which is like, I'm going to cultivate stress in a training environment to help you function under duress or under stress, whatever, right? Because if I am teaching you how to fire an M50 Modus, an M2 50 caliber machine gun in a combat scenario, and I'm like playing Moonlight Sonata, like classical piano, and the mood is gentle and the room is darkened and everyone's calm and you're just honed in, yeah, sure, you'll learn how to use the weapon. But the moment someone starts shooting at you and your adrenaline spikes and you freak out, like, you're gonna lose your mind and you're not gonna have any idea what you're doing. But if I'm like screaming at you and banging pots and pans around and there's other guns going off and people are yelling like, oh, whatever, like, and that's how you learn to fire a machine gun, then when you're getting shot at, you're like, oh, this is like, it's just a much better ingrained muscle memory. And, anyone who's never been in the service is gonna be like, oh, that's traumatic, blah, 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 blah. Whatever, dude. Like, look, we are training you to survive in a combat zone, not to, be gentle and docile. We want you to be able to kill when you need to, because otherwise you're gonna die. That's, the realm of it, right? I was in the Marine Corps, not the Air Force. And I don't mean to, that's not a, like, the Air Force shit talk. That is like, they don't do the same training, and that's because they serve a different role in a different environment. So, but they are going to cultivate stress. That is how a lot of these branches work, and it's going to be beneficial for you in a lot of ways. That said, the whole PTSD thing is real. I deal with it, like a lot of guys deal with it from various different reasons, and it really is hard to come back from a situation where you are on, like, alert 24/7 for months, 7-8 months in Afghanistan, and then come back and just like, click, it's off, I'm normal. Ooh, like, that's not easy. You're operating here for months when you should never have to operate here. So to come back, like, it resets your baseline. So there is a lot there, and I'm not gonna like dig into all the this, that's, and the whatever, but just look, hey, talk to people. If that ends up being you and you're dealing with this stuff, you're not alone. I deal with it. Most vets deal with it in some level. Talk to people. We're all here for you. We love you. Get outside, enjoy the nature, enjoy the sun. Like, nature and good company, great for you. I'm going to mention a couple other ones here. One is relationship hardships. I think mentally, relationships, like, there's always this joke about like divorcees in the military, but relationships are hard, right? Because long distance relationships are hard anyway. But then you throw in crazy training schedules and stuff. Like, one of the things that came up in divorce counseling was my ex was like, well, you ditched me. Like, our son was born, and like 2 weeks later, you were out of state for 6 weeks. And I was like, sorry. It left to me. I wouldn't have been, but I had a career school. I got promoted. I got orders to this career school. I had to go do the school. Otherwise, I wasn't going to rate my MOS, and it's this whole mess. Like, that was the slot I got, so got to go. And then I came back, and like, whatever. It is what it is. You are going to be on training exercises, deployments. You are going to miss things. Plenty of my friends missed their kids being born, or their kids graduating, or their kids whatever, or their wives whatever, or like all these big life events, marriage, whatever. They happen whether you're there or not. That life is going to keep going for people, and that is a hard adjustment for you. It's also not always easy for your relationship if that's the norm, right? And it's ironic. Sometimes I know people who, when that ended, like when they got out of the military and now they actually have to be together all the time, that's when things start to fall apart. Vice, like, falling apart because it's rough when they're together. They just realize, like, they get apart. They're like, oh, I don't like you as much because now we spent all this time together. And so relationship struggles are real. It's there. That is a mental stressor for sure. And another one that's not often talked about is the mental stress of leaving the military. Transitioning out of the military is hard. You've created this identity of being a service member or a vet or a Marine or whatever. You've got this high level of purpose. You're serving your country. You're serving the greater good. You're serving a higher cause. Like, that is a lot to decouple, like, unpack and just be done with. And that's honestly why I think a lot of vets struggle with like suicide and all that stuff, is they lose that sense of identity. They never figured out who they really were. They lose that sense of purpose. And I've got a video coming out where I talk about all these things that you need to learn and do and prep for before transition out of the military. And I would definitely recommend that you check that out, because I think it will help a lot of people with just really kind of clearing their head around, you know, your expectations as you leave the military, because it is a bit of a rough transition to exit service. And I don't think enough people talk about it or prepare for it, especially because, you know, like the people who are still in the military have never gone through the transition, so they don't know. So the ones that you are around don't know what you're about to go through, and the people who do know what you've gone through or about to go through have already left and they're not there anymore. So find someone who's been through it, done that, talk to them ahead of time, prepare ahead of time. And again, like I mentioned earlier, like sunshine, outside, nature, good friends, camaraderie, spend time figuring out who you are as a person outside of the military and what you enjoy, passions, hobbies, all that stuff. Figure all that stuff out. Again, it'll do you a lot of good. All right, so some of the lifestyle and career stuff, like we already talked about missing family events and marriages and births and birthdays and deaths and all that stuff, right? Like my grandma died when I was in Afghanistan. Luckily, I got to go and say goodbye because she had cancer, so it was kind of a given. But I got that news while in Afghanistan, and I'm glad I got to say something to her before. But, you know, it is what it is. That stuff does happen. And so you're going to have to deal with the sacrifice of knowing like you're away, you're missing that stuff, and you're not always going to be able to get home for it. There are going to be some impacts to, you know, education, career stuff. Like you can absolutely go to college while you're in with the tuition assistance, and you can go to school when you're out with the GI Bill, but it may not always be on your schedule or your terms. It may be a little bit more time consuming or difficult, complicated, whatever. It can be done, but it may not be simple. And so that can kind of mess with your flow. Like you might get your degree in 6 years instead of 4 or whatever. And you may have some really cool, depending on what your job is, you may have some really cool career opportunities come up that you're just not able to jump on because you're still in obligated time of service. So that could be a bit of a detriment depending on what you're looking to do. But also, I would argue that the military does a really good job preparing you for transitioning out of the military and giving you a lot of other skill sets to create opportunities. So I think you'll more than compensate for that. You are going to probably move around several times in that first enlistment and multiple enlistments. I know people who move all the time. And so, you know, frequently moving and changing different cultures and new groups of friends and whatever, meeting people that are close as brothers, saying goodbye, moving to another duty station only to run into them again. It's a whole weird game that we play in the service. But I will say that also creates the opportunity for using your VA loan to house hack and build wealth. I've got other videos on that, so I'm not going to digress too far, but it does create opportunities for you to utilize those benefits to help set yourself up financially, which is really cool. I think you're also going to have to get used to just some of the like kind of, I don't want to say crazy stuff, but like, you know, the like from a career standpoint, the needs of the Marine Corps, the needs of the Army, needs of the Navy, needs of the Air Force, whatever. Like you may want to go to a certain duty station or have a certain billet or a certain job and have a certain plan for yourself. And the military may say, that's great, but we want you over here. And so you're going to have to learn to deal with some of that stuff. There are some sacrifices there as far as like you try to plan out your roadmap and it gets just, you know, hits a road bomb, pun intended, whatever. You'll also probably have to deal with the fact that depending on branch of service and whatever, sometimes you like the whole promotion thing is weird. Like in the Marine Corps, you may be the absolute best at your job, and if this guy's kind of mediocre but a lot faster and a better shooter, he might get promoted before you. Like they are upgrading the system, but there are like stigmas where like the PT stud gets promoted really fast, even if he may or may not know what he's doing. That's not always the case, but I've seen it happen. I've also seen, you know, if you're really good at what you do and then you've got a mediocre partner, they might keep you in the rear with the gear and send the mediocre partner off for all the fun stuff. Like I had I don't want to say mediocre. This guy's a stud, one of my best friends. But like I had a couple different times where, you know, I was at a unit and I got told I was really good at PowerPoint and he was not so good at PowerPoint. And we were both good at the operational side, but because I was good at PowerPoint, I got to stay in the rear and he got to go to Dubai. I love him. And James, if you're watching this, you know, Tyler, whatever, you go by, I don't remember which one's which anymore because of your Instagram. I always try to like send you stuff on Instagram and it gets fucking lost because I can't find you because your name's unsearchable. Anyway, Ski Baby, he knows who he is. If you're watching this, love you, man. But yeah, like I was good at PowerPoint, so I got to stay back and he got to go to Dubai. And I was like, damn, I wanted to go to Dubai. And it never happened. And so like you may find yourself in that situation where if you're good at your job, you get promoted. If you're too good at your job, you get stuck in the desk. If you're not so good at your job and you're really fast, you're going to get promoted above the guy who's decent. Like it's a weird, there is a game to the promotion system and you're going to have to learn that because that'll help your career out. And that's just a weird, like, it's not just a sacrifice, but it's just a weird thing to learn. All that being said, I still firmly believe that the military is the single best thing that you can do coming right out of high school for a job for a young man and woman. I think it sets you up for success. I think there are a ton of benefits, both tangible, intangible. I think it is an incredibly honorable and noble thing to do, and I love it. It set me up for success. There's no better decision I've ever made. So hearing all these sacrifices, would you still join? I'd love to hear what your thoughts. I'd love to hear if you served and you've got a crazy sacrifice you had to make. I'm sure I missed some good ones and they're just not popping into my mind, but please share them down below. And just remember, guys, like these are sacrifices, but there are sacrifices in anything and everything you do. And that's okay, because that's what makes a lot of this so worthwhile. It is all a crazy ride that we call life. It's worth it. Stick around, hang on, enjoy the ride. Love you guys. Subscribe.